Good morning, Toronto. Good morning, world. This is Eduardo Harari from Spanglish Sports World English edition here with my great friend and co-host Ari Shapiro. Let me remind you that this show is being brought to you by Spanglish World Networks and on Cinco TV's channel 249 and 250. Remember, you can please go to the iOS and Android stores to download a single application, which is totally free, which makes it very easy to download. You don't have to worry, and you can enjoy all the programming that both Spanglish World Network and Cinco TV have for you at your reach. Remember also that Cinco TV can be found through Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire and Amazon Fire TV sticks, Roku and Roku sticks, and in all smart TVs 2016 forward. So let's look at what's going on and we are going to start through the world of baseball. And later on, we are going to get into a discussion with Ari into a topic that has been big in the sports world, and that's the topic of home violence and sexual harassment in the arena of sport. But let's start with the main story in Major League Baseball today. And that was yesterday's 3-0 win of the Cincinnati Reds over the Cleveland Indians. A battle that went 9 innings and 9 and 1/3 innings in a no hit, in a perfect game situation for the pitcher Miley. Well, Ari, unreal to see that there was another bid for another perfect game. It has been now 7 this season, and it's just outstanding.
You know, I want to tell you it's outstanding. I want to revel in it because I love the lore that comes with no hitters and perfect games. And let's start, Ed, by creating a huge distinction between the two. I need some of your younger fans and listeners to appreciate the fact that a no hitter will happen a lot more often than a perfect game. That's just the nature of baseball. To spin and weave and craft a perfect game is about one of the most incredibly celestial things that somebody who's playing baseball can do. So much has to go right, in order to accept what that means, and that's why there have been so few of them. No hitters are a lot more common, but even so, like you said, to have 7 games now that have gone into the 9th inning, and I think there have been four no hitters so far, right? I think in the American League. You're stuck with this reality where on one hand you love it, you appreciate it, it's such a rarity, and it's such a competitive rarity too, going back to the dawn of baseball. But then there's a small part of me, Ed, that's saying, why are we seeing so many of them? And of course the answer is clear. This is a very different era of baseball when the league is hitting 235 and the average hitter strikes out more than he walks. You're going to see a lot more no-hitters. And considering the way pitchers are throwing, the way that they're brought up and trained to throw aggressively, it was nice to see what Miley did. But there's a small part of me, you know me, the baseball nostalgist, who's saying, man, oh man, this is too many. This is too many. This is going to be a more common occurrence as time goes on, even with pitch limits, even with these strategic bullpens where you have 8 or 9 pitchers, 8 or 9 arms ready to go. I don't know. On one hand, I was thrilled to see it. On the other hand, I'm seeing it too often. And that's got to be a concern, because it should be a very rare thing. You should only be hearing about a perfect game once every couple of years, or a no-hitter maybe once in a season. But I fear now moving forward, because of the nature of the game, you're going to be seeing a lot more of this.
100%. But it's still nice to see. That there is still pitchers that actually want to pitch 9 innings, because not many do.
No, not many do at all. Not many have the toolbox and the capacity to throw a 9-inning game, especially when you consider that the average 9-inning game, you're going to throw at least between 100 to 120 pitches if you're going to take a realistic shot at a no-hitter or a perfect game. How many pitchers are equipped to do that? And this early, because it's still relatively early. We're talking in the middle of May, and we've got no-hitters flying left, right, and center. I suppose it's only reasonable to assume that you're going to see more of that in the beginning of the year rather than later. But still, if you're a Blue Jays fan, for example, all you have to do is take a look at the team and say to yourself, it's just a matter of time almost that there's the possibility that there'll be no hit one night if they get a really hot Trevor Bauer, or they get somebody that they're facing that's just right on his game. It's a hell of an era for that, let me tell you.
And now that you brought back the Jays, and you brought back the idea of how difficult it is to pitch a no-hitter or a perfect game, we can go back to a historic Blue Jay pitcher by the name of Dave Stieb that was just a phenomenon. And his book says it all. The book that his autobiography says, "Tomorrow I will be perfect." And he struggled with that. And I think that was the nemesis of his career,
That's
because
interesting.
it's psychological.
I like that you brought that up. That's very true. I think the worst enemy for Dave Stieb was Dave Stieb. That was the guy who stood in his way. Fans and people who love baseball will always appreciate Dave Stieb if they take the time to learn about him. If you didn't have the privilege of seeing him like I did and like you did, then you have to research and go back to find whatever footage you can. Dave Stieb was an absolute monster of a pitcher. Dave Stieb was like the Johnny Depp of pitching at times, where he just had this aura about him at a certain point where at any given time he could just absolutely knock you off your feet, both with his artistry, with his cerebral game. He was a very intelligent pitcher. I remember so many games, especially in the late 80s, where he would take his sweet time stepping off the rubber and collecting himself, because he was a real perfectionist. And when you consider how close he came to pitching a total of what he missed, I know he missed at least one perfect game and at least 3 or 4 no-hitters. So you've got a man who easily could have finished his career with upwards of 4 or 5 games that he completely dominated. And if not for a little lack of baseball luck, could have closed it out. Names like, who was it again? One of them was Roberto Kelly, who got him against the Yankees in the bottom of the 9th with 2 outs, right? And the other one was, the other big one was the big looper that went over Manny Lee's head, I think it was. Who was that? Who did he pitch against?
Detroit,
that's it. So if you think about it, he finally got the one in Cleveland, which, with all due respect to that one game, compared to the others that he was involved in, it was probably his weakest of all the games that he pitched in terms of how many hitters he struck out, how many he walked, and so on and so forth.
well,
But,
and I want to look at that game that you just brought up, June 27th, 1984, against the New York Yankees, and Roberto Kelly. Let's look at the lineup that these guys had, and it was Don Mattingly. You know, you had players that Willie Randolph. That great battery of players in that team, that it makes it more impressive to look at. So
it really does. And don't forget that the night with Kelly and Mattingly and the Yankees, and by the way, Don Mattingly was probably my favorite hitter of the 80s, next to Kirby Puckett and Eric Davis. If you take Eric Davis, Kirby Puckett, and Don Mattingly, that's all I needed for baseball as a kid growing up in the 80s. It's astonishing, again, to think how he dominated that game and how many games he dominated that it looked like he was going to close and he couldn't. It's just tough. It's just a no-hitter by its very nature. The idea of getting 27 hitters without allowing a hit is an extraordinary accomplishment. But again, back then, it was especially highlighted by the fact that there were some unbelievably cerebral and disciplined hitters. You try getting Don Mattingly out 4 times in a game. It was nearly unheard of. So the fact that he on so many occasions dominated these teams and put himself in a position to win, what an extraordinary player. And I remember, what was it, late 90s when he came back? Was it 96 or 98? He came back to the Blue Jays. And even in his limited pitching time, he was still effective because he had that Steve slider. He had that breaking ball that just went all the way from 12 o'clock down to 6 o'clock, and then it's good night take a Valium, go to bed.
Yeah, I mean, we had great features along the way here in Toronto that did those fits. One of them was a little gentleman by the name of David Wells that didn't succeed here in Toronto, but succeeded in New York. And nonetheless, in his first appearance for the New York Yankees under the pinstripes after he was traded, and it was amazing to see David Wells not only throw a no hitter but throw a perfect game. And ladies and gentlemen, just to give you an idea what a perfect game is no balls and all strikes.
No
Uh,
walks and all strikeouts really is what that is. If you're pitching a perfect game, you are literally touching the face of the baseball gods. Because what you're doing is you're controlling the game as a pitcher. Look, you and I both know the pitcher by nature is more powerful than a quarterback. He's more powerful than a goaltender. He is that equalizer. He is the alpha and omega. He can keep you in a game until you can win it, or he can secure it until you take it home. The pitcher, when he knows what he's doing on the mound, is an astonishing component of why baseball became such a popular sport and remains such an impact, having such an impact on people. To be able to go 27 up, 27 down without a walk, without any kind of error, without any kind of wild pitch that causes a problem, it's the excellence of execution, as they like to say. We know that's not my phrase, but I think that's the best one to use in describing what a pitcher can do when he throws a perfect game.
so one of the, I mean, and we know that the starting pitchers are the elite of the league, uh, and you cannot compare it. But I want to go back, and Ari, this is one category that you are going to love because I consider sometimes re- the closer that don't have the chance to complete a perfect game, but sometimes closers come in the seventh, eighth, and ninth inning, and I'll give you a Yankee sensation that you probably will say he was at the top of his game, and that's why the Rolex Relief Award was won more times by him than anybody else. And that's a gentleman by the name of Dave Righetti of the Yankees. That when he came into the picture, you said, "Okay, this is shutdown. Nobody is going to hit him. Nobody is going to get edgewise near the ball." And I wish that there was a chance for the relievers to actually get an award based on their, and I get the idea of if they come in three innings, that would be considered a perfect game for them because there is no one that has a bigger role than that of closing a game.
It's one of the most mystifying things in the game of baseball that we have so utterly devalued those middle relievers, those closers, those components that can help not just throw you a perfect game or a no-hitter, but is so valuable. I mean, David Righetti, if memory serves, was the kind of guy that you could bring in any situation. You needed a 3-inning save, he'd give it for you. You needed him to come out with a couple of outs left in the ninth to close out a game, he'd do it for you. He kind of reminded me a little bit of what the Blue Jays tried to do with Mark Eichhorn, the great Mark Eichhorn, who had that great Submariner style of pitching, underhanded almost. You would literally see him in any situation if it meant keeping the game alive. And don't you think, Ed, it's really sad that baseball somehow found a way through their enhanced analytics and Moneyball era to completely devalue these pitchers? Like, look, I'm not saying you need to have the same closer, even though I love the heroic image of the same closer coming out in the ninth to get the job done. You don't need that same person, but what you need is a bullpen that understands situational pitching. Because if you can find a bullpen of 3 or 4 arms in particular that know what to do when they come in the seventh, eighth, and ninth, you will win more games than you lose. And it's a shame when you have a really talented baseball club with lots of great bats and great arms in the field, and you're doing all sorts of wonderful things, but your bullpen keeps blowing games. The Blue Jays had that. You remember that in the mid-90s. It was horrible how many games between 1994 and 1999 that the Blue Jays lost by having a bullpen that wasn't reliable. And there's no surprise that the reason the Blue Jays succeeded was because two men by the name of Tom Henke and Dwayne Ward unlocked that glorious end zone reality for them. Because once you had those two coming into the game in the eighth and in the ninth, it was done like dinner. And then, of course, Dwayne Ward obviously packed some kind of Faustian bargain or a deal with the devil, because for the next 2 years, he ended up being the dedicated closer and alpha and omega for the Blue Jays. That final year he had before he lost his effectiveness with his arm injury, the statistics will just blow your mind away if you take the time to appreciate what he did. Dwayne Ward in 1993 was not only automatic, but he was so aggressive, and he would just come into a game and he would say to himself, I am going to take care of these three hitters and move on to the next inning, or I'm going to close out the game. We still have so-called closers. They're just a shell of their former selves because they're not respected. They're not paid well, a lot of them. If you become famous because you manage to log 30 or 40 saves, it doesn't necessarily mean that the next year you're going to be guaranteed anything, right? Closers come and go. And yet here we are talking about how important they are. I mean, what's more important than having that one pitcher who comes out to close a narrow lead or to keep the game within reach? To me, they're just as important as the starting pitcher that pitches the first 5 to 7 innings.
So you brought an interesting guy on Mark Eichhorn, and I want to go back in history with Mark Eichhorn, because Mark Eichhorn had that little submarine pitch that everyone really had fear about. But we have to go back, because there is only 4 pitchers in the history of baseball that pitched that threw that pitch. And I'll go back to the wonderful Pittsburgh Pirates with Dave Parker and Willie Stargell and Omar Moreno on that and the closing pitcher for that team was Kenton Charles Tekulve, and he was the one that devised that pitch. And if you saw the stars across his hat, it was for every single strikeout that he pitched, because that was the emblem of the Pittsburgh Pirates. When Tekulve came in, you knew the game was finished, because no one was going to catch up to his 100+ mile an hour on the submarine pitch.
That's right. It was the same thing with the Orioles. Quisenberry, Dan Quisenberry was
And
the
the
American
Orioles
League.
and Kansas City Royals, both. Quisenberry made a legacy of that pitch.
Quisenberry scared the hell out of me as a Blue Jays fan in the 80s, because the very thought of him coming into a game meant that there was a 99.99% chance that that game was over. He always found a way to secure it. And the fact that he could get an accelerated fastball, I mean, he was not a lot of these sidearm underhanded style hurlers. They tend to be confused for being more finesse oriented. Some of them just let the ball go and it goes where it goes, like a knuckleball thrower. But the truth is, some of them can throw the ball hard. Tekulve was known for the fact that he could bust you inside with a fastball, just like Mark Eichhorn's go-to pitch was the high fastball. And when somebody's delivering a ball at you, sidearm and underhanded, and the ball is rising, it becomes such a psychological challenge for a hitter to know whether to lay off the pitch or not. I love that. I love that flair that there were some pitchers that came up with that. Same thing with the knuckleball. The knuckleball is never taught. The knuckleball is something you learn because you're a young kid one day in the summer in your baseball career, and someone teaches you how to do it, and you suddenly develop it into your repertoire. And the next thing you know, it's an emergency out pitch. That's the beauty of baseball that's been forgotten. I think we've entered an era where pitching coaches are focusing on heavy, hard, aggressive fastballs and not doing too many maneuvers that might damage the arm. But if you think about the knuckleball, if you think about the sidearm delivery, that doesn't damage your arm. What it does is it adds another wrinkle into your arsenal. And that's what I loved about Mark Eichhorn. And I don't know if you remember, Mark Eichhorn used to confuse hitters by just throwing overhand from time to time. He'd mix it up. So there you are. You're used to a guy throwing sidearm, 3/4 delivery below the belt, and suddenly he punches you in with an 89-mile-an-hour fastball that seems like it's 115.
Well, And I'll give you one more for the record books you wrote in the knuckleballers. And we know that the main knuckleballers in the game of baseball, and they are in the Hall of Fame now, are Phil and Joe Niekro. But when Phil Niekro came to Toronto, he taught it to one little kid that started using it, and that little guy was a name by the guy name of John Cerruti,
Hmm.
and John had always said, "I need a pitch that I can call my own," because he was an average pitcher with great potential, and when Necro taught him how to throw the knuckle, people were like, "Okay, he's coming in with mid high 90s, and all of a sudden they saw a ball coming at 60 and they said, what the hell is going on? And the Jays had and this is the amazing part of what makes up the greatness of the game of baseball, because I'll mention you two different things that happened with the Jays in the 80s, and that's a pitching change in the bottom of the 10th inning, uh, closed by Tony Fernandez back in '87, uh, a game in Kansas City, and then you had a gentleman by the name of Candy Maldonado who actually pitched 3 innings and closed the game and won it. And you know, and you're saying, hold on, but these guys are out, a shortstop and an outfielder. How the hell do you get that
Only
into a
baseball, huh?
pitcher?
Only baseball. You don't see that in any other sport. You don't see a position player, a forward or defenseman in hockey go into the net. You don't see an offensive player in the NFL go to play defense traditionally. I mean, I'm sure there have been some examples of it, but that's what I love about baseball, Ed. I think baseball is absolutely magical in how unpredictable it can be. And I remember Maldonado pitching. I remember Jose Canseco pitching and damaging his arm as a result. But that's a completely different kettle of fish because it was Jose Canseco. So you knew it was just a matter of time that something crazy would happen to him. But the fact that you can have athletes who are known for hitting home runs, shagging fly balls, and doing Jesse Barfield caliber throws to home plate without a bounce, and then they could actually come up in the bottom of the inning after you've gotten your nachos and your Cracker Jacks and you're sitting and having your beer, and suddenly they're pitching because the game is 18-3, and you're getting completely blown out. You've got to preserve some arms. Only in baseball does something like that happen. We don't see it as often, but Tony Fernandez was an example of a player like Candy who just had that baseball resiliency that he could pick up a ball and also throw it for you and get you out of an inning. But it's a very ridiculous concept. I'd hate to think that I'd ever put a position player making millions of dollars and then watch him damage his arm pitching. But in a sport like that, sometimes it happens.
And I want to remind you of Candy Maldonado because it's that game that he pitched and he won the game. Uh, he actually won the game. It was uh, it was also a world record in baseball and a moment in baseball history, because in that game, Candy Maldonado played all 9 positions in the field. Uh,
That's right.
so it made it more impressive that he won the game as he closed it. Uh, so it was
His
impressive.
stats, it was really impressive. He played, 14, 15 years, and his stats don't exactly jump off the page at you. But if you remember him, if you watched Candy Maldonado play the game, you always got the impression that he was really on top of the game. I liked the way he approached his swings at the plate, the way he played the outfield. I loved his sense of humor. Man, Puerto Rico's produced some unbelievable players. And what they all share in common is they understand baseball. They just get it. It's in their blood. Something about their DNA is fused with Abner Doubleday's creation, as it were. So to see someone like him play all nine positions and get a win in a game tells you that he was a real baller. He was really something special to the game, and I'm glad that he crossed paths with the Blue Jays and was able to share in some of their best moments.
No, one of the things that I remember clearly going into a clubhouse and talking with Candy, and he's a good friend now. We talk all the time. But the funny part was that he was seeing his locker because he had more gloves in the locker than the locker could afford. There were six gloves for every single possible position that he could play, and added to that, he had uh, because he said that each glove deserved a batting glove to slide into it. So he had nine different sets of batting gloves as well. So it was it was just an unreal
It's
locker room to look at.
And I'm just looking over now. I'd forgotten how many teams he played with. He played with nine different franchises. And not only did he win the World Series ring with the Blue Jays, but he had experience with the Dodgers, the Giants, the Brewers, the Cubs, the Indians. He really got around with all of these older original franchises, and that makes for one hell of a career. I don't know what would be better, Ed, being one player who spends your entire baseball experience with one team, or being a player that's sought after by other teams, not necessarily because you're the greatest player out there, but because you bring something to those clubhouses. And getting Candy Maldonado was a big get for the Blue Jays. It was one of those small moves that people dismissed, but in the end, it came back to offer them so much, especially his
So,
versatility, because you could put him anywhere.
so the interesting thing, and we are continuing on the topic of Candy, is that and his nine position game. In the history of baseball, has only been three people in the history of baseball that played all nine positions in a 9 inning game, and the other one, and you probably will remember this name. His name was Jose Oquendo.
Yeah, that's right.
Both Puerto Ricans. Uh, so when you mention that Puerto Rico creates great players, I think they create machines, not players, because to be produced three of the greatest players to play the game. Uh, it's really outstanding.
It is outstanding, especially when you consider the politically or socio-cultural reality that is Puerto Rico, right? I mean, they're embedded in American history, but not in all the best ways, right? They're still struggling to be respected as a member of their union. They're still trying to be respected with what happened to them a few years ago with the horrible electricity grid that went down and how they were really left to fend by themselves. It's a hardy, resilient little place, Puerto Rico, that produces some serious baseball players, players who not only know how to play the game, but they come from a history, a very strong tradition that makes them respected. And I'm glad that you're focusing on that.
So now that, one second, I don't know what happened here, but
I mean, it's sorry to interrupt you. It's a who's who gallery. I mean, it obviously starts with the greatest player. Some would argue, in some cases, in baseball, which was Roberto Clemente. You can't say enough about him and the life that he led. But if you look at some of theirs that they produced, Lindor, Molina, Correa, Baez, Cepeda, I mean, Beltran, it's astonishing. And of course, Carlos Delgado here, who will always be remembered as the greatest Puerto Rican to put on a Blue Jays uniform. I mean, it's an astonishing tradition for a small, country. I call it a country, but a small state, if you will. It should be a state. I mean, how many millions are there in Puerto Rico? It's not a very large place, and yet look what they produce.
so a phenomenal story that has come out to the limelight. The story of Drew Robinson. I don't know if you remember that name from the Giants. The Giants, the San Francisco Giants outfielder, who lost a night because the agony of in 2017 he went through attempted suicide.
Mm.
And it's nice to see that Yesterday, he made his first debut in AAA. He's back on the field, uh, and now he explains his story about the the turmoils of living as a minor league player, uh, uh, being a single father at the time, and what that meant to him. He had, raising a 3-year-old baby because his wife died in a horrible car accident, and it's nice to see that he's back finally from all that turmoil.
And there's so much we don't know. I mean, other than what the media just takes in little bite-sized captions and throws our way about what he went through, his suicide attempt, and so on and so forth. Uh, what can you say, especially with baseball? You and I both know that the support for the minor leagues is completely lacking, right? Let's just call a spade a spade. Major League Baseball is not concerned with the minor league system. If they were, they would go out of their way to not only support the players and make sure that they're looked after financially, but provide them with some real help for their mental health, wellness. And who knows how many other Drew Robinsons there are out there who are struggling, whether they're single fathers or whether they're just trying to get through the minor league system. Um, I talked about this on my show last week and had a few roundtables, Ed, where I asked the question, is baseball internationalism, i.e. the idea of going out and finding all these players from all walks of life and bringing them to play a game that's based in America, is that a good thing for the game when it comes to forgetting their minor leaguers? I mean, what is baseball without its minor league system? All these great players that we're enjoying had to go through it. But yet the apparatus is not well looked after. It's an established fact that during the pandemic, a lot of minor league clubs have been forced to close and are not paying their players. I think this is where baseball is failing. The reason we see a Robinson and credit him for his adversity to come back and make the show and try to create inspiration for others. We've seen it in all walks of life, right? It's not just baseball. Who was the big famous one in as a celebrity in Hollywood? I think it was Owen Wilson. I mean, Owen Wilson had a suicide attempt, and everybody kind of shrugged it off when he got better and he got back into the movies. It's amazing how quickly we forget how famous or ambitious people can find themselves hitting a wall, and then through a combination of their circumstances and great despair and grief, they do this. I mean, to lose an eye and still come back. I'm going to have to read up on it. I haven't read up on it enough, but I want to know how, if he only has vision in one of his eyes, how he's able to play. Because as you remember, there have been other athletes who unfortunately have lost their eyesight. The most famous one was Kirby Puckett. Remember what happened to him? He woke up one day and that was it. Glaucoma robbed him of his ability to see. And we didn't have the technology that existed. And he had to retire from the game. So this is quite a gift that Drew has, and I hope he does well with it. I hope that he turns it into a story that can inspire other people during difficult times.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's one of the things that I have always said. I understand the struggles that people. I experience the struggles of being a minor leaguer.
Mm.
And people don't, and that's why we, you and me, as a whole, we are journalists that we don't pursue the game story. We pursue the athlete story, the the story behind the story, because
That's it.
many fans don't understand the struggle that it is being 162 games, uh, dealing with family issues, dealing with baseball issues, and all the pressures that are put on from the fans onto the players, not just from the clubs. We have, as fans, everyone has an expectation of what they want to see from that player, and if they don't, they start criticizing and booing him and this and that. And behind that player, behind that number, there is a human being. There is a real human being of flesh and bone that has to has every day has to leave his home and leave his family to not just go to work, because baseball is no longer what it used to be. Now it has become a job. It's not an entertainment, or it's not a passion. It has become a job, a full-time job. But in some cases, you have kids that are 19, 20, and 21-year olds now with families being brought from, as you said, from other areas of the world and dumped into middle ground uh, Tennessee or Iowa, and they say, "What am I doing here? Is this what is this what I bargained for?" You know, and it's tough because coming one for the international players, and I had the great uh, luck of nature that I lived in Canada and learned the language before I entered the minor leagues. So I understood the language. I understood the basics of what the culture in North America is like. But as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, or 20-year-old Dominican or Puerto Rican or Brazilian or Colombian that is dumped into mid America or into Madison Hat, Alberta, uh, in the midst of the winter, you don't comprehend, you don't speak the language, and how the struggles go.
Nor do you understand the culture around you, the nuances, the way people look at values and behavior. And this is why we've had so many, I think, examples of a disconnect between the Mexican player or the Colombian or the Puerto Rican who shows up and becomes a fan favorite because he's got a flair. There's something about him that's unique and wonderful. And it's no surprise that a lot of these players, especially from the Latin countries, they always seem to show up with a certain intangible that fans are curious about. Vladdy was a great example. Vlad Guerrero Jr. probably fits the mold of what you described, right? This was a phenom identified at a very young age as someone that can be given a bonus and just dropped into a minor league system. And they went ahead and did that. He doesn't speak English. So what they did was, instead of focusing on creating an awareness of the culture and slowly molding the player to maybe become part of that more seamlessly, Vlad Guerrero Jr. just did one thing. He picked up his bat and he started to hit and just annihilated minor league records. But then he made it to the show. And as you know, Ed, the show is a tier of not just achievement, but expectation that if you don't maintain, you could be finished very quickly. Obviously, if you get a big signing bonus, you're going to get your shot. And that's exactly what happened with Vlad. He got his shot. They put him in. The first couple of years were nowhere near the great hype that they created. And by the way, I hate the media hype that franchises instill in some of these players during their journey. The Blue Jays are horrible for that. They're absolutely horrible in building up a player and touting him as being the next great thing since sliced bread, and then watching dismay as he falls flat on his face. It takes a character, an indomitable will to succeed in Major League Baseball. Am I surprised that Puerto Rican players and Mexican players and those from Brazil and those coming in from Japan and South Korea are coming to the show with conviction, with desire to make it happen? No, I'm not surprised at all. There's something about the opportunity, the privilege of playing in America, in baseball, the way it should be at the highest level, that these athletes honor. And that's what Carlos did, for example. Delgado, when he came up, he burst on the scene. He hit, like, what was it, 9 home runs in 6 days or something like that. He had this beautiful April. And then you know what happened? He couldn't hit a ball anymore for the next month and a half, and they had to send him down. But he came back. He worked hard. He realized that maybe he thought he could control the game. The game clearly refuses to be controlled like a stallion. And he came back and he turned himself into a Cooperstown caliber player. Vlad Guerrero Jr. has a chance to do that as long as he gets continued support from the Blue Jays, as long as they stop with the silly hype and talking about his minor league excitement and the numbers and look at him for who he is as a player and make sure that he gets all the support he needs. Because I'm sure there were some rough days in those first 2 years where he was probably thinking, I'm nowhere near as good as people think I am. But you and I both know he's a special player. He comes from a special stock. And to see him persevere is a testament more to the player than the environment he's put in. Because I think Major League Baseball does a lousy job with supporting their minor league system. The proof's in the pudding. You would think that's the one thing baseball would invest money in more than ever. It's kind of like, that argument you hear in the US that they're constantly complaining about infrastructure and how they don't spend enough money to upgrade their mass transit systems. Well, that's what the league does with minor league system. They're like, oh yeah, we've got guys coming up, but don't worry, if we don't get it through a minor league system, we can always go around the world and pluck people for millions of dollars. That's what I worry about the future of the game.
So one of those players, and let's go back to the Blue Jays, because with all the changes that the Jays have made this year to their roster and how where they want players to platoon or play or whatever struggles they can throw onto these players. Uh, and you mentioned Vladdy Guerrero Jr. Vladdy Guerrero Jr. didn't come up to be a first baseman, and we all know that he played middle infield and or third base. That's what he was designed and built and has played all his career in. And then you throw Vladdy into first base, and you take the opportunity from another gentleman. And although he's American, he has a Hispanic background in the name of Rowdy Teles. And Rowdy Teles is a kid that came up through the system and earned his spot at the major league level. And now he has been designated to sit on the bench because they don't find a scheme for him to play in, and he has to wait for the inevitable that either Vladdy gets tired and can play, or that Vladdy gets injured so that he can play. And it's not right, because for this kid that, as you said, this, and it's exactly the same story as Carlos Delgado, because how did we learn about Rowdy Teles? It was 11 home runs in 9 games in when he came up to the majors, and all that has disappeared because you don't hear the name Rowdy Teles anymore in a
No.
in the Blue Jay field.
And the truth is, I don't think you expected to, though, Ed. I mean, the team went out and they grabbed guys like Semien and Springer to add to their already burgeoning, young, talented roster. So the way I see it, anything you get from Rowdy Teles is a bonus at this point, because I don't think the organization is putting a lot of stock into developing his skills. If they did, they'd give him a hell of a lot more at bats, especially considering that both Biggio and Jansen this year can't hit outside of out of a paper bag, as they say. I hate that expression, but I love using it. They can't hit out of a paper bag. And the reality is that this is the kind of year where young guys like Teles should be given a lot of at-bats, because the truth is the Jays aren't in a rush to win a World Series. They still have to develop their team. They're nowhere near being a playoff contender. They're extremely exciting. They're very talented. They'll shock you some nights with how great they can play. But the truth is this is not a team that has to worry about postseason consequences. What they need to worry about is whether they can develop a balanced baseball club the way the 85 Blue Jays looked, right? Remember the 1985 Blue Jays, which really should have won the World Series in terms of talent. The reason that they were effective is not that they had 4 or 5 great players, but that they had about 10 really good players who could support each other. And while their big stars were still developing, I mean, Tony Fernandez, George Bell, Lloyd Mosby, Jesse Barfield, none of them were near their peak. But because they were coalescing the way these Blue Jays are, there was this hope that, they'll all grow together. They'll develop a culture, a chemistry. The Blue Jays have a chance to do that. They throw the same young core out there every game. The problem is that Jansen's hitting, 080 and Biggio is having a real tough time at it this year. And then we haven't even talked about Lourdes Gurriel Jr., who's all but disappeared in terms of notoriety, and they were really touting him to be something special. It takes time. Baseball is a tough game. It's tough to build a team that can waltz into the playoffs and give you the impression they can get it done. The Blue Jays still have a lot of work to do that way. They've got great components. The ownership group is saying all the right things, but if fans think that they're going to win a World Series tomorrow, they're sadly mistaken. It's going to take time.
No, it's going to take at least, at, in my perspective, the way I look at the game and the way these guys are melding together and growing together, probably it's going to take them at least 3, 4 years.
Think about it. It's going to take them 3 to 4 years, and then there's no guarantee that they're going to get past the first round of the playoffs because the baseball playoffs are really challenging. You're up against some real monster teams that are out there competing without salary caps. It's a dangerous landscape. You've got teams that are spending money and doing whatever they can to win because they want to hog the spotlight. They want to show the media that they're worth their salt. Blue Jays is the only Canadian team now playing south of the border. It's a tough spot to be in.
And that's my next point in hand. Are the Jays going to come north ever again? Because the way I am seeing it, I mean, and they are saying yes, we will be back probably in September. No, you won't be back in September. This season is completely out. We know that for a fact. The levels of vaccination are not at the level that
No.
it would require for a major league team to be here. But from the other end, uh, and this is because who owns the team? I think Rogers, if they cannot bring this team up north, are not going to want to have it anymore.
That's a fair point. I can absolutely see that happening, and I almost wish that a private billionaire would just come riding out of the air and snatch them up and really invest in them as a club that's worth investing in. Corporate ownership is rough. It really is. I miss the old days where you could have somebody who just buys a team and tries to run it in their image. And yes, I know some of your listeners will be saying there's equal opportunities for them to screw up the team and not run it well. But at least if it's a private owner or a family that owns it, that when they say we're trying to make the team better, you can actually believe that. I don't know if we can get that anymore with corporate ownership like Rogers, because they'll say all the right things. But wasn't it a year and a half ago, Ed, that they were talking about potentially evaluating the team and figuring out whether they want to sell it? There's a lot of stuff going on. Fans shouldn't be surprised anymore. What they should be focusing on is the on-field product. And the on-field product for the Blue Jays has a lot of value and collateral. It also has a lot of embedded flaws. A 235 team batting average tells you the kind of era we're living in. I remember watching the Blue Jays in the 80s and 90s and thinking, if this team hits less than 270, I won't be satisfied. If they don't show me that they can play consistent baseball, I won't be happy that they can win a championship. And only when they demonstrated their ability to play consistent baseball. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the 93 team never lost 3 games in a row. I don't think they lost a series that year. What they did was they played competitive baseball every single time they came out on the field. And as evident as recently as yesterday, I mean, the Blue Jays beat the A's 10-4, and then they lost to the Astros 10-4. You've got to expect that. You've got to anticipate that as long as they only have one bona fide true starter and a ramshackle bullpen by committee, you're not going to get consistency. And if you don't have consistency, you don't make it to the playoffs and you can't win a round.
So you brought a guy by the name, and I want to go back to the story, the idea that we have 5 minutes, 4.5 minutes to
We
go,
sure do.
but I want to bring the story of a gentleman, a player that you probably remember, who had all the expectations in the world to be the greatest star in baseball for the Jays, and his name was Junior Felix.
Oh, wow. You want to fit that in with 3 minutes left on your show today. I love it. That's bold. Listen, what Junior Felix did was extraordinary in his short time with the Blue Jays. But I still need to have the question answered at how old is he really? We never did find out, eh? We never knew what his real age was in the game. I found that fascinating.
But the struggles and Lourdes Gurriel Jr., I find that is the same, is feeling that mold that Junior had. A guy that goes out to the field and has told the organization, I'll play anywhere you want me to play, but I want to play because I need to get better at what this game
Well
is
said.
asking for me.
That's exactly it. That's what should have happened. Felix got his chance, and outside of one memorable weekend in Fenway, the truth is he was very inconsistent. Lourdes Gurriel Jr. is the real deal. I'm convinced of it, but he needs at bats, and he needs to be their priority. And right now he's not, and that's a big problem because he's affecting his confidence. You can see it in the way he plays.
And I have to say, I have to send kudos to Lourdes Gurriel Jr. because the highlight reel is getting filled with his magnificent fielding abilities. The last of it, it was against the Houston Astros a couple of days ago, in which he caught the ball off balance, going over his head, and still made a put out at home plate without stepping into the ground. And I was like,
I mean,
where
this
did
is
this
what
come from?
look, he comes from baseball royalty. His brother, I think it was, hit a home run against him the other day when they were playing. And in the final analysis, if Vlad Guerrero Jr.'s father had spent as much time on the defensive side of the game with him as he did hitting the ball, he would also be farther ahead as well. So it just shows you that when you come from a family that teaches you the fundamentals of baseball, you never lose it.
Yeah, for sure. So to close out, and ladies and gentlemen, this conversation can be extended this afternoon at 2 o'clock uh, in an application called Clubhouse, a new social networking application that is taking the world by storm for all those who use Apple phones. Please log in, look for Spanglish World Network on your iPhone. When you enter Clubhouse, we will be there. Ari Shapiro, myself, and the rest of the team here at Spanglish Sports World, uh, to bring you a topic, interesting topic, and it's called Media: The New Norm. How do you report when you don't have the chance to see? And it's going to be an interesting topic to develop, and you will have the chance to come up to the stage and ask the panel questions directly, and they will be there to answer your questions. So it's Clubhouse. The club that inside Clubhouse is called Spanglish World Network, and we'll be there at 2 o'clock. And the time of the conversation can go for hours. We don't have a time limit, so be there. And as a re- and now I have to say farewell until next Saturday when we come back with Ari and myself to bring you the best commentary of sport in general, and we'll touch the topic that we were supposed to touch today, but we never
For sure, we
we
will.
never reached. But until then, thank you very much for listening to us. Thank you very much for constantly coming back and seeing us. And remember, Spanglish Sports World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, but especially live it, because Spanglish Sports World is sport, and sport is Spanglish Sports World. In the name of Ari Shapiro and myself and the staff at Spanglish World Networks, please stay at home. Please stay safe during these COVID times of the pandemic.